Good evening and welcome. It's a beautiful evening here in Williamstown, Massachusetts. I'm Anne Leonard, Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Clark, and I'm very pleased to introduce the final public program being offered in connection with our current exhibition, A Change in the Light, the Cliché-Verre in 19th century France. I encourage everyone who is able to come see the exhibition before it closes on May 16th, a week from Sunday. It was beautifully and intelligently curated by Andrew Kensett, a 2020 graduate of the Williams MA program in Art History, whom I thank again for his exemplary work. Tonight, we are fortunate to have with us Abe Morell, who will be speaking about Cliché-Verre in relation to his own practice as a photographer. Now, before I introduce him, let me remind you that you are welcome to submit questions at any time during the talk through the Q&A function if you're on Zoom. At the end, we will answer as many questions as time allows. So tonight's speaker, Abe Morell, was born in Havana, Cuba, and immigrated to the United States with his parents in 1962 at the age of 14. He received his undergraduate degree from Bowdoin College and his MFA from the Yale School of Art. His many publications include a photographic illustration of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, A Camera in a Room, A Book of Books, Camera Obscura, and The Universe Next Door. Most recently, in 2018, appeared two books, Tent Camera and Flowers for Lisa. Morell's work has been collected and shown by leading galleries and museums in most major art centers around the world. In 2013 and 14, a retrospective of his work traveled to the Art Institute of Chicago, the Getty in Los Angeles, and the High Museum in Atlanta. But rather than continuing to list his many honors, I thought I might close with a story told when he received his honorary degree from Bowdoin in 1997. In response to the question, "Why don't you take pictures about exile?" he said, "Because I'm more interested in life." And I think this humanistic spirit is what you will see more of as I turn the virtual podium over to Abe. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. And I am really sorry that I have not been able to come to see the show that's up now and gone tomorrow, I guess. But I look forward to seeing them in the study room. And it is kind of a rare thing these days, you know, a show about cliché-verres. No one knows what that's about, what it is. But it has a very, very interesting history, including the very beginnings of how a cliché-verre was born, how it was invented. And for that, we owe Fox Talbot, this man here, who is the British inventor of photography, announced in 1839, like Daguerre as well, but he had been doing work from 1834 to 1839. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but in 1834, he wrote about being able to discover a way to get images on paper that was sensitized in a way that it could receive light impressions. And basically, that's the discovery of photography, a print that will last forever. So he gives you an instruction about darkening, getting a piece of glass, darkening it in some ways. And then when it hardens, that whatever that substance is, you take a sharp object, a sharp pen, and make drawings on it. Basically, it's a cliché-verre, as we later on find out. So this is the first image, the only image that exists on record of the first cliché-verre. And Talbot had someone who could actually draw. Talbot could not draw at all. He was an awful artist. Anyway, he had this man draw a Dutch scene on a piece of darkened glass and made a sketch of a scene. Then that plate was sandwiched with Talbot's new photographic paper under the sun. And what results is a print, a photographic print of a drawing, which is really what a cliché-verre is. Talbot around that time was also making not Cliché-Verre pictures, but what he calls sun prints, which was to take samples from his garden, bring it, to a lit place, under the sun, place the samples of botany on the paper itself, expose it to the sun for a couple of minutes, and then virtual images of those samples were made into photographs. This is what we call photograms now. And this is some others by him. Very simple. You put a piece of photographic paper down, you put an object, usually something that has an interesting pattern, expose it, and then you get the thing itself. These are, again, the same idea, but by Anna Atkins, who was working around the same time that Fox Talbot was making. And these are something called cyanotypes, but essentially it's a sensitized paper that will receive the shape of what's lying on it. Beautiful, gorgeous, amazing things happening right at the beginning of photography. Later on, the idea of photograms resulted in the works of Man Ray, where, again, these photograms are not, there's no camera, there's no enlarger, it's just basically a photographic paper, and you put things in front of it and you light it until you achieve an image that you like. There's another Man Ray. Very interesting way of making abstractions. And usually it's a one-of-a-kind print. So once you make this image, there's no other, because it's very difficult to repeat it. Mahalinaj was another person in the 20s and 30s who made beautiful photograms. Again, sort of like Fox Talbot and Anna Atkins, but in more modernist ways. Really mysterious shapes and light sources that you can't even figure out where they're from. I've made photograms for a number of years. I've always loved the idea of playing in a darkroom. And these are some of my pictures, but instead of doing it like Man Ray or Mahalinaj, I decided to take large format film, like 8x10 or 16x20 film, in the darkroom, spray with water or put things in front of it. The problem here is that with film, you cannot have any safe lights on, so you're really quite blind about what's going to happen. So there are a lot of trials and errors. But I would put things on the film itself, light it, put some water in it, light it, and then at the end, I would get a negative that I developed that has these images. Flashlight with salt. This is virtually water sprayed on a piece of 8x10 film. And then I lit it with a flashlight so that an exposure was made of the contact points where the water and the film meet. Same here. They're very beautiful because they're like contact prints. So the description is highly resolved. It's a more solid than solid. Cliché-Verre, as you know, Anne and the rest of the crew who put the show together, began, as I suggest, with Fox Talbot, 1834. Well, dozen or so more years later, someone like Corot, a French photographer, French painter and printmaker, decided to try this idea where a darkened piece of glass, and you can do that with a candle by using soot or ink that dries out. Anyway, once this plate is dried with a black coating, then if you're a good artist, like Corot is, you can make drawings on that surface. And and in fact, what you end up with on the left is a negative. You sandwich that later with a piece of photographic paper. And again, that's called a contact print. And what you get is the reverse of the Cliché-Verre. So what's white is black and black is white. But at the end, you see this guy playing the flutes, and it's a Corot image. So that's what a plate would look like if they exist. They're very delicate, so I don't think many of them survived. Here's some Corot images from the show, and I only have a little time to show these, and the show is a lot richer than I'm going to suggest here. But Corot is my favorite. And very much in keeping with his other art, his paintings. This Cliché-Verre of those trees, if you know Corot's work, he painted a lot in this style. There are many, many paintings that have that look. And when I was a resident artist at the Yale Art Gallery, I could photograph basically anything I wanted. And so I asked them to pull out two pieces, a sculpture by Harriet Whitney Fishmorth and Corot. Yeah, actually, the Corot appeared and the Fishmorth came out as well. And I wanted to do a sandwich of both of them. So this is my photograph of the real Corot back there and her sculpture. But me and Corot go back. Really the official way that I became involved with Cliché-Verre began when I was asked to collaborate with Oliver Sacks on a book that MoMA was putting together, 2009, I think. And they usually do this, they pair people up. Anyway, I was delighted because Oliver Sacks is has been one of my favorite writers and thinkers ever. So the idea that MoMA had was, okay, let's print a chapter from this book where he basically meditates on the plants and the cycads and the prehistoric plants and this Micronesian island. So would I do something with Oliver Sacks' chapter on plants and cycads? And so this is what the book eventually came out. It's rather beautiful. But I started thinking, okay, would I like to make pictures of ferns themselves? And it sounded kind of dumb because it wasn't my style. But I started thinking about a couple of things. Neurology, and Oliver was a neurologist, and much more than that. But then and there he is. He's no longer with us, but what a brain, what a mind, what a body. Thought about him as a neurologist. I also thought about Santiago Ramon y Cajal, a wonderful neurologist who is known all over by his drawings of nervous systems in animals. He actually, through the microscope, he actually drew what he could see inside cells. And this is some of his pictures. So knowing Cajal's work and neurology, and then thinking about just the collaboration with Sacks made me think that instead of making stupid pictures of ferns, maybe I should try my hand at Cliché-Verres. And I think
no camera, no darkroom, daylight, and you get magic. A transfer of a drawing onto a photographic print really began with Fox Talbot. Later, Corot and Millet and a few other French artists began to use that same technique to transfer some of their drawings onto photographic paper, which is part of the genius of it. This hybrid thing, ink, drawing, photograph, it struck me as being, so remarkable that I wanted to do the same thing, which was really fun because as a photographer, our hands are usually pretty clean. We're just dealing with f-stops and whatever. But this way of working with the Cliché-Verre was really like, I was an artist. I had my hands were black and I was pressing things. I was making a hand thing.
So these are some of the hand things that I made for that book. And again, it was just ferns that I got delivered from the New York Botanical Gardens. Oliver knew people in that garden, and they actually FedEx me kind of rare plants and cycads so I could fool around. So these are some of the ones that made it to that book, The Island of Rota. So beyond, the work that I did for the MoMA book, a few years later, I started thinking maybe I can revive that process in my imagination. Could I make other things, as opposed to plants? So I started thinking about ways to make rubbings and scratchings and wipings on glass with ink to create, abstract landscapes, for better words. So here's some that have come out of that. This is there's a panorama of an imaginary landscape, but since my scanner can only scan up to 8 by 10, I had to break the landscape into 3 parts. So this is 3 8 by 10 glass plates worked together as a landscape. Then they were scanned individually. So once that happened, this is sort of a landscape panorama that I was after. This is a kind of a weird one where I was photographing in Maine in the winter, and I made pictures of the woods a lot. I mean, just it's beautiful there. So if you are looking at this image, the third part on the left is a photographic negative of the woods. The last third on the right of this image is also a photographic negative of the woods. So in the middle is a Cliché-Verre that I made with colors and rubbings and scratchings to try to imitate a little bit of the feeling of the other 2 parts, to create a kind of a mixture of media, but seemingly one thing. This is not a good picture yet, but I want to try this where I have a Cliché-Verre in front of other stuff, so that some kind of background drama begins to happen in depth. Anyway, it's not a good picture yet, so don't take this as a work of art yet, but it's an idea that I have to do more with. This is not my Cliché-Verre. This is a crater in Mars. I guess you can get close enough with satellites. So it's a NASA picture of a crater in Mars. So some of the more recent Cliché-Verre pictures that I've made have to do with these illusionary landscapes that feel like Martian or lunar, some kind of topological cross-section of some territory. And this is something I really want to do more of. I've never been to Mars, but this is as close as it gets. Another project that I did specifically with Cliché-Verre was this portfolio that I worked on to create 5 Cliché-Verres of ferns that then I would make prints of. Except in this case, I made the Cliché-Verres first, scanned those glass plates when I liked them. Then Paul Taylor of Renaissance Press transferred those images into a way to make photogravures out of them. A photogravure is simply a way to transfer an image, photographic image of otherwise, so that there's a way to etch that image within a copper plate. So whatever the image is, it's actually etched on a copper plate with different depths. And depending on the depth, ink lies in it in different ways. So when you run a press on a piece of paper with it, you get a beautiful print. So these are all, this is 5 images I made for that portfolio. The final result was my Cliché-Verre made with photogravure prints. And they're just gorgeous. And photogravure is another old method that in some ways I'm trying to revive alongside Paul Taylor. And this is, I meant to do them so that if you hang them in a horizontal panoramic way, parts of one begin another. So there is some consciousness here about how them put together create a kind of a one single passage. My history with prints, with printmakers, began with, and I'm sorry, this is a very small JPEG. I hope you can see it, but it began, I went to Bowdoin in 1967. In 1969, I took photography for the first time, and I met this man, David Becker, who was just a year ahead of me. And he knew prints. In fact, in his apartment, he had Piranesi's and Rembrandts and anyone you can think of, he had prints of. His middle name initial is P, and that stood for Pillsbury, which so I understood how those prints came about. But anyway, he was a huge teacher of mine about prints, and with him, I got to discover incredible number of great etchers and lithographs, and including this really weird Hercules Segers, strange artist who Rembrandt adored. Of course, I discovered Goya. This is a photograph of a plate by Goya, an etching plate that the Museum of Fine Arts has, but I wanted to make a picture of it as a kind of a homage to him. And his prints are to die for. I mean, the range is great. There's a show at the Met right now of many of his prints, and I'm going to see it soon. Anyway, these prints are just have a radical feel to them that I'd never seen before with David. And he also introduced me to Piranesi, who basically made up everything. He's supposed to be doing ancient Rome, but it was mostly from his brain. So they're fantastical, realistic, but out of his brain. This is my picture in honor of Piranesi. I made a collage of Piranesi sketches to make my own. So I'm always stealing from these people that I love. This is another Piranesi huge print, and these books are gigantic. They're just beautiful. This is his attempt to suggest what the basement of this edifice is. Never seen it before. It never existed. So there's a certain kind of illusional game that I loved about him. In fact, I loved it so much that when I went to the Boston Athenaeum to look for a book that this was in, and I made my own picture of the book. That's how much in love I am with prints and how they relate their times and also people's imaginations. This is another picture that I made of Piranesi's book of the Colosseum, but when it's half closed, it's quite weird. Another interesting person that David Becker introduced me to was a French 19th century etcher named Marion, who just made very odd etchings and prints because they look quite realistic. The sense of architecture and volume and light is kind of no rival there. I mean, they're just very, very concisely done. But there's always a sense of mystery. I mean, this is where plague victims are being taken out. So his images have a dual feel of realism, as if it was a photograph of it, but then this dark, looming danger behind it. That's another one by him, Marion. And this is Bresden, another David introduction. It's probably the strangest. 19th century printmaker who made extraordinary prints. I mean, they're full of stuff. If you look at a print like this you could look at it forever. There's things, animals, there's eyes looking at you everywhere. Anyway, I love these Bresden so much that it stuck with me. This is perhaps one of his greatest. And David had a copy of this, and I looked at it for a long time. Another Bresden. So I'm getting close to the end here. So my history with prints go way back. I'm still involved with the idea of prints, and obviously Cliché-Verres are part of that tradition. Dürer made a series of prints, 15 of them, narrating the apocalypse, and some of the images are quite well known. In fact, we imagine the apocalypse through Dürer's eyes because he's the one who first sort of visualized it for us. So I have this idea of taking the 15 prints of the apocalypse, and this is print number 3 and print number 4 in that sequence. I thought I would then photograph each plate, 3 and 4, and combine them in a kind of a strange mixing process to create a kind of a new one. So these two yielded this one. And this is number 1 and number 2. It's classical Abe, this thing. Take something that exists already and make something with it. And this is the last picture. This is a photograph, not a photograph, a Cliché-Verre I made of a sunflower for a book called Flowers for Lisa. I made 76 photographs of flowers for my wife. And it could have been 150, 176 if they didn't stop me. Anyway, I wanted to end with this picture because it has strong ramifications for me. The idea of taking a live sunflower, pressing it on a piece of inked piece of glass, creating the impression that it does, becoming something else, transformed, but still keeping what the original nature of it was. But then ink moving in all kinds of ways, suggesting dark landscapes and space and storms and things like that. It's the kind of thing that artists are always looking for. And in this case, the Cliché-Verre is the simplest. It's basically a piece of glass with ink in it, and you put stuff in it. The idea that that simple thing can yield such a revolutionary, for me anyway, sense of the past. In fact, it's a sunflower, so it's almost like Talbot's sun prints. It gives you so much more than you would even expect. That's the kind of thing that I'll just keep doing forever. Thank you.
That's just beautiful, Abe. I mean, the image, but also your talk to us tonight. The what you've done with this medium, taking, as you say, stealing. I think you're too hard on yourself, but taking from the old, and you mentioned many of my own personal touchstones in the realm of printmaking, 19th century and earlier. But I'm sure everyone in our audience has found some touchstones in what you've said. And then bringing that forward into a vision that just seems completely modern and singular and imaginative. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you're willing, we'll take a few questions with the time that's left. And there are a lot that have come in, and I want to remind everyone listening that you're free to, if you're on the Zoom platform, you're welcome to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And if you're on Facebook, you can use the comments section on Facebook Live to send questions, and all of them will come on up through. So it seems like we've got a range of questions here, and some have, maybe we'll start with the ones that are more technical in nature, and then move on to some that are perhaps a little more philosophical.
I can do both.
Yeah, well, because it is a medium that's, as you said at the outset, is unfamiliar, I think, even to a lot of very art interested people. We have some questions such as how many printings can you make from a Cliché-Verre plate?
Well, it depends. When Corot was doing his scratching, as many as you have paper for. So once you have the matrix of a negative of a kind, an ink negative, you can place that on top of photographic paper until the cows come home. It's endless. It's not like a photogram, and I should explain maybe a little bit of that. A photogram is more like a piece of photographic paper where you perform something on top of it. You put either your hand or a pencil and maybe your silhouette, and then you shine light through it. And then that impression happens, and then you develop the paper and you get it. But it's difficult to repeat, sometimes complicated photograms, especially Man Rays and Macaulay Notches. They're just very difficult. So photograms tend to be unique objects. Cliché-Verres, not. And so it's not like copper plates where after about 100 images, it starts to wear out, and then the later impressions are not so good. So nothing like that here. So
I guess the only risk is that the glass plate might eventually break if you manhandle it, but if the plate survives, it's printable for
yeah. Now I would say though that if the glass breaks, for me, I didn't do it on purpose, but that would be an opportunity for me to make something new too. The broken glass itself could have a kind of an interesting new format, new shape.
Definitely. Those chance operations sort of give a new spin to it.
Exactly.
And then related question about the possibility of exposing the paper through more than one layer of glass. For example, could you use 3 or more layers, or would the image just get too blurry in the process? I think this person also is curious about the thickness of the glass that can be used.
Well, obviously, the thinner the glass, the more transparent and vivid the image will be. If you use plate glass, which is quite thick, it will be somewhat blurry and in not interesting ways. I've tried that. So thin glass is the best. You can add, by the way, I'm giving all my secrets away. You can also do this stuff on Mylar, which is a fantastic material where you can cut it to size, make the impressions, then sandwich them either against photographic paper. And that's less and less possible these days because people don't have darkrooms that much these days. So what I do is once I achieve a negative of a kind, I scan that image in a very high res kind of way. So you get a digital file that's fantastically high res. In fact, you can make this picture 6 feet by 5 feet and it will look glorious. So so Mylar is a fantastic. In fact, Jasper Johns has used Mylar throughout his life, and to me, they're like sort of the best because they have a kind of a weird translucency going on, and it's a beautiful material.
Oh, that's terrific. Okay, then we had so something of a more philosophical question. That one of the early images you showed of your own work, light on me, of the vase and the Cliché-Verre, and you mentioned that you thought this was an image in process. It wasn't yet a work of art, but it was an idea that you were still working on. And so one of our listeners wants to know, when do you, Mr. Morell, consider your work a work of art?
When I slit my throat. No, it's a very difficult thing to answer because some days I'll say, oh, this first one, perfect, but there are fewer and fewer of those.
I don't believe it.
I mean, no, the fewer. It takes a long time for me to be satisfied with it. Not only the technical issues, but the conceptual issues. Just what is the I mean, if I could use the word meaning, what is the meaning of this, and how does in visual terms alone satisfy my soul and my intellect? So there's a lot going, and this is not news to any artists out there. But that vase one was just a test, just to say, okay, if I put something behind the Cliché-Verre, clearly something in back of the Cliché-Verre can be activated, can be something. So I was thinking that maybe I can make complicated backgrounds that have some relationship to the Cliché-Verre itself. So there's a kind of a density playing with one another, almost musically. Background could be the low notes in a piano, and then the front could be high notes in a piano. Some relationship of a fugue. Things in front, things in back, joined together. So I think about music a lot, in fact, and in some ways that is part of sort of my thinking, that there's a certain musical quality. I mean, I think Bach's fugues are just a great example of a concept of two different things that are different, but somehow when they're played together with intelligence, you get a very complicated third thing. You get
Yes.
a fugue. You get things that did not exist individually, and and it's so important to me in my work.
So the polyphony being more than just the sum of the voices. Well, I know that you and I could talk more about music some other time. I would love that. So we have a question now from the curator of the exhibition, Andrew Kensett. And I'll read it. You've applied Cliché-Verre to make landscape images, and that's totally in keeping with the process's early history, going back to the Barbizon artists and even to Fox Talbot's first Cliché-Verre that you showed. So the question here is, why did you gravitate to landscape in working in Cliché-Verre? And do you think there's anything inherent in the process that lends it to that genre?
Well, I'm sort of a closet landscape photographer. I mean, there are so many good people who make great landscapes, and my landscapes always have to have a kind of a weird twist, because maybe I'm insecure about calling myself a landscape artist. I just love the way that in printmaking, I mean, if I had to name one person, the way Rembrandt made landscapes really interesting. It just feels like a natural thing, because it's sort of, we're all witnessing something, and it just feels like it's a democratic subject. Other than that, I would do portraits. I cannot draw to save my life, so drawing heads would be totally out of the question. Still lifes, I'm kind of good at, so I may decide to do that. But landscapes feel like it's such an important genre, because it's sort of with each artist over the years, the sense of landscape, changes from pure God and then just pure dirt. And it's such an interesting evolution, that because of our new understandings of the world, what used to be the subject has now shifted to, I mean, Dürer, are you kidding? He was making plants and dirt images.
That's right.
I mean, this is in the 1400s. I mean, so the sense that art making and landscape making was such a liberator to all these artists was, I think, really key. So in some ways, I want to participate in that. And I also, I don't want to be Ansel Adams, or whoever. And I should add, because we have a couple of minutes left, but I've invented something called a tent camera, and it derives from my camera obscura work, which optics bring something inside a darkened room, and I photograph that. Well, I invented or came up with this idea of a tent, a dark tent, with a periscope sticking out of it with an optic set up, and that throws an image of the landscape onto the dirt itself. And so I photograph what's on the dirt or grass or tiles or whatever. And my way of doing landscapes has to be necessarily roundabout, and it's just my nature. I don't want to do the same shit that people have done before. When I'm buried, someone says, yeah, he made Yosemite look interesting.
That's fascinating. That's great. So maybe we can shift back to a couple more questions about technique and process.
Sure.
First of all, this is a question for you. When you've made Cliché-Verre, do you place your plates with the worked surface in contact with the photographic paper, or is that the clean glass side that goes against the paper during the exposure? Or maybe it depends.
No, you want the ink touching the paper.
For the crispest.
Yeah,
image.
but again, I'm not using paper. What I do now is I scan these glass plates with the ink down when it dries, because it's a very expensive print scanner. With the ink down, I really high res scan that negative. Then we can make, adjustments and prints and all that. So
so it's gone to there's a digital process that intervenes there.
Yeah. But I mean, thinking about that, whoever asked that question, what if you try, I don't know if you can see me, but if try a plate, but then half lift it on the scanner so that maybe a third of the image will be sharp, because it's touching the plate of the scanner, but the rest will be out of focus. I'm going to try that.
I just got a new idea.
Thank you.
And then about black and white. Now, the examples you showed us were black and white, but are there color examples of Cliché-Verre using color photo paper?
They're coming again. Not using photo paper, but yes, I am planning. One of my next projects is to try to make images about painting. I don't know exactly what that means, but the ink itself, the oils themselves, forming something, and then I want to photograph that too. But that could be transferred to the idea of Cliché-Verre. So color inks could be used in this same way. So the problem with color, and I have to be careful with this, is it can easily go vulgar. It can easily go too wild. So, and I don't know when to stop. But it is something that I'm interested in. The color is really totally interested me. After I made the Flowers for Lisa picture, it was like a color galore. I mean, I just cannot get enough of it. But I think there will be color Cliché-Verres in one way or another. But it also, I think the nature of the images will be more or less abstract, like the lunar pictures I made.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you wouldn't use as a path to further realism of a realistic subject, but rather to develop an imaginary.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be like Joan Snyder or something. I want to be an abstract painter. I do. I mean, very much so. In fact, I constantly dream about making beautiful, large paintings. Beautiful in the dream.
But you made up for that by making some very, very large photographs.
Right? Yes, that's correct. Yeah. But painting is lurking always in the back. Because if I go to a museum, my first trip is to go see paintings.
Okay, interesting. So, and speaking of some of your other work, you have a fan in the audience who mentioned in particular camera obscura work and is making a request, if possible, to share one on the screen with your audience tonight. But maybe we can file that away, and maybe if it's handy, and if not, we can let that go.
Sure.
Great. Do you want a minute or?
I don't know what I'm doing, but 1 second.
Sure.
I hope I haven't lost you yet.
No. It's worth waiting for. We're still looking at your screen. So.
Okay, this is one I made in Paris. I don't know, a few years ago, but I quite like it. You see it?
Yes. Oh, wow. Ooh, so tell us about the making of this one.
So I was a resident artist at the Terra Foundation in Giverny, next to Monet's garden, for a while. And then a woman who worked there said, you know, when you return to Paris, I have a pretty interesting view of Paris. And I'm always looking for, you know, camera obscure images of things. So this is a camera obscura that now things have evolved slowly over the years. And so as opposed to the early camera obscura pictures, this was made with a lens called a diopter, that the whole room is darkened except for this lens on the window that will focus at a certain length. So this lens was perfect for the focus. So things are really quite sharp.
Everything seems sharp.
Yeah, and that's because
so.
Yeah, that's because this new process that I'm using with the lens gives you that, and it's upside down like most camera obscuras, although I have ways to also turn it right side up. But and here is sort of one of the important things about it. When I first made camera obscura pictures, the exposures, because there was film, were 6 to 8 hours long. You know, horrific. You have to go out into town, see a movie, have lunch, you know, talk to your dealer, whatever. Well, because I'm now using digital technology, it's gone from 5 to 6 to 8 hours long to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The exposures are 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And I know there are these purists that go, well, no, film is sacred, and I said bullshit, you know. So whatever works is whatever works. So this very high, it's 150 megapixels, so the resolution is really quite amazing.
Wow.
But because it's a 2 minute exposure, clouds stay put. If you do a 5 hour exposure here, nothing, including the sunbather on the top there, would not be there.
And left. Yeah.
So in some ways, because of the new technology, I think Monet or one of those impressionists said Impressionism was born because paint was put in tubes. So it allowed artists to not have to mix their own colors, but put 12 tubes in a bag, go out into the landscape and paint. So that change of technology in some ways allows a certain possibility to happen. In this case, short exposure allows for these beautiful clouds to happen. And it's part of, I mean, technology is always part of the game. And of course, you know, the woman had a young boy, and as soon as we came in, she said, "Oh, let me put the Legos away." And I was like, "Oh, no."
She said, "No, leave them right where they are. Don't get in my shot."
Yeah. So I don't know if that satisfies the fan.
Oh, well, we'd love to see 10 more, but thank you for sharing that. That's super and such a great demonstration of a different part of your practice. But in the spirit of what you just said, maybe we think we know the answer to this, but a couple minutes ago, someone asked a question, do you work in a dark room at all anymore? So fess up. Do you ever work in a dark room, or are those days just over?
Those days are over. Yeah, they're over. And but you know what's interesting is that I did it for like 35 years, 40 years. So, and I find it interesting because this is not a rant or anything like that, but when I used to teach, I quit like 10 years ago teaching, but I noticed that young people always missed film, like, oh, film, you know, the great element in photography. And I didn't, you know. I think the less you've had contact with something, the more you miss it. A certain kind of romanticism about what was not given to you. I mean, in some ways, film was taken away from young people because of the industry and because of technology and all that. So they have that natural romanticism because they really never did it.
Yeah.
Same thing with Exiles. I left when I was 13 from Cuba, and I noticed that exiles, at least the Cuban ones that I know, who were 1 year old when they left, they have the most fervent memories of Cuba and the longing to go back to the motherland, and a motherland they never saw. And it's very interesting. I think there's a connection between how much time you've done something and how much you're ready to go forward. And I think I did film for so long and I loved it. I totally loved it. But now it feels like, oh, this is a new phase in my life, and I want to keep going, and whatever helps that, I'll take.
Well, that's just a beautiful point on which to end. I almost hesitate I think you just concluded just so beautifully there. It gave us so much to think about, also in a more philosophical way for those of us who are not photographic practitioners. There's a lot we can take with us from tonight's talk.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun.
So yes, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And again, to our audience, thanks for being here. And you have until the 16th of May to come see the exhibition. I know travel is not easy. It's never that easy to Williamstown, but these days it's harder than usual. So if you can't make it to Williamstown, do be sure to check out the website features this program and others that are posted there.
And I do have to apologize for one thing. And
yes.
My wife always tells me this. I rushed through images very fast. So I'm sorry if I was going like a machine gun with images. So I hope that I didn't offend you or anything like that.
You simply left us wanting more. Just as you were saying, the people who didn't have film or who were exiled so early, right? That they're the ones who need the most. So we will come back to your imagery.
Well, and I'll see you at the Clark sometime this summer, perhaps.
That sounds terrific. I really look forward to that. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night.